head of a security organisation within, obviously a contentious organisation. I just wonder, can you tell me, where do you see security sitting at the moment, and where do you see it heading from your experience?
So I guess we're, in some respects, a little bit unique given the nature of the organisation, but in many respects security is security. There's some nuances between organisations and the way they run, but ostensibly it's the same. About my organisation, the thing that I say to people now is I think I joined what you'd probably describe as a research organisation 5 years ago, and now is a much more business-focused organisation. So as the organisation changes, every area in the organisation needs to change with it, including security. So I've been encourage our team to understand a lot more about the business, what makes the business operate, where does the business make its money, who are the business customers, and how does security enable that business. It's a corny phrase, but I think largely it's only been paid lip service in a lot of organisations. Some are forced to do it, but I think it applies equally in the government space as it does in the private sector as well. So I think as security evolves as an industry and we become more expert at the security technical aspects of our role, we've equally got to balance that with business acumen as well.
How do you go about that within your organisation? How do you impress security on an organisation?
Well, there's two parts. From internally, especially if you're trying to create a sustainable security organisation in the larger organisation itself, people have to have somewhere to go. Almost invariably security is a small part of any organisation. So in order for people to continue through the career, they have to have other opportunities. So that either one encourages them to leave for a larger job in a larger organisation, or provide some pathway within that organisation to go beyond security. In order to do that, you have to have some other business skills or some other transferable skills. So one is we encourage, say, our up and coming security people to not only perfect their skills in the security space, but also look at what other business skills. You know, should senior security or aspiring senior security managers look at getting themselves, you know, an MBA or something. I don't think that's a long way away from where people need to think, particularly if they want to, you know, continue to develop their career. You can't impose security on the organisation. So if you think of, you know, security as a business unit within a larger business, that's the mentality you need to apply. It's to convince the rest of the organisation that you add value, that you minimise risk in a way that's understandable. You know, there's always the prospect of instilling fear and using that as a methodology by which to get internal funding. You know, if we don't do this, we don't comply. If we don't do this, we're exposed to this security risk, as opposed to putting it as a business case that has some return on the investment you're asking the organisation to make.
With the younger people, one of the things we're talking about today is succession planning. And quite often when I sit in a room full of security people, the senior people are all in their 50s, some are in their 60s, obviously looking to retirement in 5-10 years' time. But the gap between them and the next level is quite substantial. Do we recognise succession planning as a priority, do you think?
If we're talking about security managers having some business skills as well, succession planning in human resource management is a part of that. It's no different within your security operation as well. You know, who are the younger people that you're recruiting? Are you recruiting the right people? And are you creating a pathway for them? Are you structuring the security organisation that has a series of levels that give people the opportunity to take another step forward, encourage them to get qualifications so they qualify for those kind of roles, and develop them so they have some opportunity? Today, no doubt you've drawn from some very senior people in the security organisation. Very few women come. Now, I'm not a person who says you should have a quota system. I don't support that, but a lot of the women I speak to, and my 2IC as a woman, is that we need to look at a target. So what things are you proactively doing to get the right people in the position where they can get those senior positions? Are you creating a work environment, the way you deliver your work, flexible workplaces, and the whole lot of other, you know, HR options? Are you seriously doing those to the point where you can sit in front of your senior executive and explain the way that you're doing that so you deliver what are, you know, more sustainable HR outcomes? Strategic
planning, is that done in security? And if not, why not?
So I've moved between different organisations, different people do it differently. When we started some 5 years ago as basically a new team of security at ANSTO, you inherited what I'd argue is probably a traditional system, some expensive equipment that had been there for quite a while, but no plan to replace that. There'd been some incidents in the past, a whole bucket of money arrives, it gets spent, probably reasonably well in terms of electronic security and physical security infrastructure. But what's the plan for that? So have you treated that asset in a strategic way? Is there a long-term maintenance plan for it? Is there a plan in terms of capital expenditure in the future? And then you apply that then to every other part of the business. Are you strategically thinking about what the needs of the business are and how security will be able to assist the business go to a new market or deliver into a different service sector or whatever that case may be? Simply sitting inside the security office and trying to plan day by day will see you behind the business, and then you face the risk then of becoming less relevant, having less of the ears of the senior executive when you ask for things. You need to be seen as a part of the business, and the only way to do that is plan in the same strategic way that you'd hope the organisation is doing overall.
Walk me through your experience, because you've been at ANSTO for what, 5 years now? Walk me through your experience of walking through the door on the first day. What were your priorities and how did you move, presuming you did move it forward? How did you move it forward?
When I say we, it's a reasonably small team, but it's not a tiny team either. But we had a unique advantage of what I sold to my managers and the rest of the team was this is a rare opportunity in your career to come in as a new team and blame who was there previously. So I figured we had about 18 months to go around and find all the vulnerabilities that the organisation had in the security space and develop a plan to respond to that. And anything we found, we could blame who was there previously. Now, I kind of say that in a half joking way, but what it did do was free us up from a trick people fall into a while is putting a system in place that you own, you've asked for money, you've done something, and then you have a sense that you need to defend it. So when I say defend it, that there's nothing wrong with our system, we've got this backup, we've got this, we've got the other, and it doesn't encourage you to do your job, which is to continue to find vulnerabilities, because that then suggests maybe you didn't do your job very well in the first place. So we had a unique chance to go and find, turn all over all the rocks and find the spiders, so to speak, develop a long-term plan, which is exactly what we did, sell that to the executive from that process and explain what were reasonable risks in a way that the senior executive could understand. We'll give them some money to fix some capital things, but also given the imprimatur to develop a business plan that would see how security and some of the other aspects that fall within the division would be delivered to the organisation in the future. So when we're asked for a business plan, it's a 5-year business plan. What are you doing over the next 5 years? What's your finances look like? What's your thoughts on your training staff? How do you manage other HR issues? What's your capital expenditure going to look like? What's your vision for how the security part of the organisation will evolve with the rest of the organisation? So again, it was a rare chance, and I say to our team now is that your job is not to defend the system, your job is to continue to find vulnerabilities, because the vulnerabilities we found 5 years ago are different to the ones that you will continue to find as crime and as threats evolve.
One of the areas I was interested in that I've heard you speak on before was that you engage through your department, I believe, in social media monitoring as a security function. Can you talk me through that a bit, please?
We have a dedicated security analyst who came from within the Commonwealth Government previously, and that person's role was several parts. So apart from your day-to-day analysis of whatever security data capture that you might do, the role was to form very strong operational relationships with all the law enforcement and intelligence community, just to create a relationship was such where a phone call to an agency was a phone call to someone that we knew reasonably well. The other parts of that role as we've evolved is how do we better use the organisational data to minimise our risk. Heard Dave earlier speak about the insider risk. In the nuclear space, that's one of the key themes. There's probably two: insider threat and security culture that the top of the agenda when nuclear security people get together. So we started to look at how do we use what organisational data exists in a way that probably hasn't been used traditionally, and that is two parts of that. I guess the first part is how do we identify who it is amongst the organisation who can do us the most harm, who's got high levels of physical access, of IT access, who's got high levels of financial delegation and that type of thing. And then look at what are all the other material that we might draw from. So with modern databases and HR and finance systems, how do we draw data from that, compare a number of, I guess, red flags to determine are there some people that we should look more closely at or be more concerned about. So in the HR space, for example, are people repeatedly getting poor performance reports? Have they got a long history of short-term sick leave? Is there any other problems in the HR space? What about in the finance space? Are they trying to physically access areas of the organisation's infrastructure that they don't have access to or should have access to? Are they working hours which seem outside? So we picked a whole series of indicators to not to identify who the problem is, but to identify a group that you might want to look a little bit more closely on. And then maybe you want to look at email traffics, what sort of websites they're looking at, all that type of stuff. So how do you better use the data that exists? One of the challenges, and again David alluded to it, is the risk of privacy. The minute you start to do that, the lawyers are very interested in, are you breaching any privacy rules? We don't think we are. We're simply using the information that other parts of the organisation use, but for a different purpose, and that is to make the organisation more secure.
You also mentioned earlier on the need to talk to the C-suite, the chief executive level of an organisation. How do you go about that?
One of the reasons I quite like the job I got is my role, which goes a little bit beyond security, but sits on the C-suite. So the ANSTO now has about 10 people who sit on the senior executive, and that security role has been part of that team since we've restructured 5 years ago. It gives very obviously a direct opportunity to talk to the rest of the C-suite group and to the CEO. So he and I meet on a regular basis. We go through a series of issues. He and the rest of the executive have been supportive of what we have tried to do, and I'd like to think that's because we've been able to communicate in a way which makes sense to the business part of the people, to the research part of the organisation, and to the other parts of the organisation, that they get what it is, and we present a business case or a proposal in a way which rings true to them.
You also mentioned technology. Presumably you use a fair amount of security technology. What's happening in the technology space, do you think? How's the technology space tracking in terms of what you need?
So I guess it's two parts about that. Technology is that it's not a replacement for the other, as I said, the other key issue for nuclear security and other organisations is the culture of the organisation. So you make a mistake by relying on technology, and the minute any sort of technology comes along, and software is an absolute classic, it becomes a challenge to see who can break that first, who can get through it, who can find a way through. So it's a part of security infrastructure that you need, but don't be confused about its ability to serve the purpose. Ultimately, there's a human who's watching a screen or responding to an alarm or doing something, and if that attitude's not right, if the attitude of the organisational community is not right, you'll still have failures. Years ago, when CCTV sort of started to become commonplace, it was always argued as a deterrent for crime. I think some people still say that. I couldn't tell you how many CCTV cameras I've walked past coming from a car park into this building, because you don't see them anymore. It's like, I guess, like living next to the train line. After a while you don't hear the train anymore, and we just become used to it. I love my IT as much as the next person, but on your iPhone now, if you activate the high Siri functionality, that means you get the microphone on is on all the time to be able to use that function. Otherwise, that function won't work. So do you think now that you'd be happy to carry around a live microphone if you use the new Cortana in Windows 10? Unless you switch the function off, it will send Microsoft, whatever your handwriting stuff is, your keystrokes and your voice input. Why? Is it to spy on you? No. It's about creating a better customer experience.
Do you do anything about educating your staff about the dangers of technology that they're walking around with?
When we came as a new team, we looked at what mandatory training is, and I think the very connotation of mandatory training means you're going to be forcing something on people they probably really don't want to do. So we spent a lot of effort about trying to make that as engaging as possible, and that we've done every 18 months is run a sort of a security culture survey amongst people and ask them about the training. And to our surprise, people have come back and say, well, we're actually interested in some of that stuff and we'd actually like to hear a little bit more about these things, which is not the response we expected. It's, you know, it's time out of my day when I could be doing something better. And in that same space, what we've had from our relationship development is the likes of ASIO and others will come to the organisation and talk to communities within the organisation, talk to the executive about the risks. So then it's less about my team, you know, perhaps you seem to be feathering our own nest by you know, frightening people with unrealistic expectations of risk. We've got others who'll come in and explain that to them as well. The IT security team put together an email. We're just going through some enterprise negotiations at the moment. Put together a phishing email that's sent out to all staff, and the reference was largely around the EA. So and there was enough to the observant person, enough in that email to give you a very strong hint there's something dodgy about the email. More than 50% of the people clicked on the link anyway. And that just led to a website that said, you know, here's the things you should have seen, this was a phishing email. So you don't want to overdo it, but that type of education I think people will take on board, because it's not just work related, but those they get emails at home, so it's going to impact on their personal lives as well. So there's an advantage for the organisation and for the individual, and people seem to be quite happy to receive that kind of information.
I've given quite a few talks to different organisations on the risk behind social media, and it is quite extraordinary the number of people that go, I did not realise that.
Well, I've got a 12-year-old daughter, so I'm worried about, you know, the immediacy of social media and what that can do for you. And once you've got something wrong in your history, whether it be a criminal conviction or a photograph of you in a compromising position, I don't think there's any recruiters left now when they're looking to fill a position. Don't do social media searches. Don't look at LinkedIn pages. Don't look at people's Facebook pages and you say, you know, that person dancing half naked on a table is not the person I want working in my finance department. And the problem is, because it's become, technology is so seamless and you don't notice it as much, people aren't as cautious about it. I mean, I'm frightened to think what people would think of me if some of the things I did in my youth had been captured for all eternity on Facebook.
You mentioned working for the C-suite of your organisation. How do you find communicating both at the very generalist level, at the C-suite level, communicating down through the organisation to those sort of technical, more tactical and operational roles, and then vice versa?
I don't communicate technical information to either the board or to the rest of the C-suite, because I don't have a huge technical understanding either, which is probably helpful. So we've got people who do that kind of work, but as I kind of said earlier, what I've asked our managers, up-and-coming managers, to do is to be able to talk in language that is not technical, unless you're writing specs for a contract. There's no need to do it. It's about, you know, what do things cost, what's the outcomes, what's the pros and cons of doing something, and write papers, write briefing notes around that. Connect what you're trying to say with something that person already understands. So this, you only know about that, this is like that. I get that. And speaking in a way where they see that there's got to be some advantages for the business. You can't have security outcomes for themselves. They've got to serve a purpose for the business. The security doesn't exist of its own, for its own need. It exists to serve the organisation. How do you make sure that your message, what you're asking, what you're communicating, resonates in that fashion?
Then what kind of conversations do you have with the CFO? And how do you find dealing with that trade-off between you as a cost to the business and delivering your actual outcomes?
Be it personality or just the way that things have gone, have a very good working peer relationship with the CFO. So I think that's one of the advantages we've got of the way the organisation chose to seat the seniority of the security role, is that you sit at the table as a peer. So it's less about trying to get someone's ear. They've got to listen to you as I've got to listen to them. We'll have a round table discussion where the CFO will want support for things that they're doing. So it's a little bit less about the validity of the security ask, although that's obviously very important, but it's probably more, I'd say, about the organisational politics and how you handle that. So I think even more so, that's another reason to understand how an organisation works from a business perspective, as opposed to, you know, even very well being able to describe a security problem is being able to understand how the business hears that and how you communicate that. And if you have the rare chance to be able to sit as an equal, it becomes more about the organisational politics than it does about the argument on the day.
Does that also mean that the security managers need to understand more about business in general, but in particular need to understand their own business or the business they're protecting?
I don't see why you can't treat security as any other business unit. As a finance section or a sales area or a market area, you need to have a business plan, and you need to be able to describe in a business plan that roll to the organisation's plan where you'll fit in. What's your contribution? How do you make a contribution that helps the organisation achieve its objectives? You can't have a very clear, thick, solid line connecting the two, yet how do you win the argument? That there's less free government money available, there's less money in a lot of organisations, and you stand the risk as a security organisation, the risk of being hit hard in budgetary terms, unless you can argue the validity of what you contribute to the organisation.